So my name is Katie Haschbeck Schneider, and my husband is Andrew Schneider, and we have been trying, or I should say this, we are 30 weeks pregnant. Um, and before we got pregnant, we had been trying 6.5 years to get pregnant. And first of all, it took several years to get doctors to take our issues seriously. I went to my OBGYN and she kind of told me, "Oh, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. Your AMH is, you know, perfectly fine. You're good." It wasn't until about 2.5 years after we had started trying that we learned that my husband had severe low sperm count. I think it's called oligospermia. And it was not only that, we also found out that he had what's called a genetic translocation, which is when two of his genes are swapped in his DNA, which meant that he himself was perfectly healthy, but that his sperm production process was impaired. He was still making healthy sperm, but just not a lot of it. And so we kind of did everything we could. We got him on supplements and things like that. And then it wasn't until a year after that we found out he had severe sleep apnea. And so we got him a CPAP. That helped, but we still were having issues. And it was at that time that I consulted um, NAPRO physician. She basically tested me for a bunch of things, and she found that I did have things wrong with me that were causing part of the problem. I had Hashimoto's with TPO antibodies that were around 190. I had autoimmune PCOS, and we eventually learned I had endometriosis as well. And so all these issues for me were autoimmune in nature. Basically, everything was like one big, ugly autoimmune storm. And so, we kind of worked diligently on trying to, first to get gluten and dairy, and that helped, but it didn't, quite move the needle as much as we wanted. Still weren't getting pregnant, weren't getting any kind of positive pregnancy tests at all. And then in August of, 2023, we were, we had read about and interviewed with Snowflake's embryo adoption along the process of our infertility journey because we knew that with my husband's translocation, it was possible that we would never get pregnant. And we had had doctors tell us that they're like, you might, but you might never with this. And so we had interviewed them. We had a really good experience. And so in August of 2023, we decided, heck with it. We're just gonna go for it. We're just gonna try to, you know, adopt some embryos here and see how it goes. And in the context of that, I told my husband, I said, I think I'd really like to hire a fertility coach. I said I'd like to hire someone who is going to support me as we go through this embryo adoption process and as we, like if I need extra tests or anything like that, because it's just really hard sometimes to get tests from your doctor. They kind of push back a lot. Um, and so we started interviewing multiple fertility coaches, and it was clear kind of from the get-go that Dr. Sklar's program was by far one of the most comprehensive and highest value programs out there. Like there were a lot of programs that we met where they're like, well, we'll help you for 3 months and then you're kind of on your own. And it was like, no, like we've been on this journey 6.5 years. 3 months isn't going to cut it. But we joined Dr. Sklar's program. We interviewed with Danielle, and she was wonderful. And it was funny because I joined Dr. Sklar's program, I think in like March or April of 2024. And, what I had kind of decided myself to do in February of that year is start an AIP diet, because I had heard about it. And sure enough, that's what Dr. Sklar prescribed. He said, I want you on an AIP diet. And honestly, I think that was what ultimately made the difference in our fertility is me going on the AIP diet because I saw my TPO antibodies drop 30% in like 3 months just by being on that AIP diet. And then they worried that my endometriosis had come back after the laparoscopy that I had in 2024. So we went back in, or excuse me, 2023. So we went back in for another surgery in 2024. And I woke up, my son looked at me, he said, "That's the cleanest pelvis I've ever seen. What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm on an AIP diet right now. He's like, that could be part of it. He's like, your autoimmune issues could be calming down, and that could be why your endometriosis is virtually gone. He's like, I can't even see the lesions operated on last year, like the scar tissue from everything. So, and I'd also been taking the systemic enzymes per Dr. Sklar's suggestion. I think that had a role to play as well. So, so we had clean pelvis, that was great, no endometriosis. TPO antibodies were tumbling down, and that was all good. And we actually had our first embryo transfer in August of 2024. And it worked, it worked beautifully. And we had it on a Thursday. And then the next day, Friday, I passed out. I was tired. But this pregnancy has been super smooth. I've gained no extra weight whatsoever, because I've been sticking to the AIP diet, and I feel like my body's getting exactly what it needs. Um, and like it's funny, I'm a little bit older at 36, and I feel like the doctors are like, how old are you? Like this pregnancy is going too well for you to be as old as you are. But yeah, it's been a really, really awesome experience. And we're excited. We have a growth ultrasound in 2 weeks. And yeah, baby's good. Yeah, I think we would have gotten similar answers, like because I think ultimately we uncovered a lot of really, helpful factual reasons why we couldn't get pregnant, but it took so long. Just the traditional method of working with doctors, Western medicine doctors just takes so long. And if we had started with a fertility coach, 6 years ago, which, my husband would never have gone for, it'd been like, multiple thousand, no. But I wish we would have, because it would have just been so much faster, because we would have known from the get-go that I had Hashimoto's and probably caught my TPO antibodies, you know, at less than 100 instead of 190 when we did. And I had to work very, very hard for years just to heal myself and get myself back to a baseline that if we had started working with a fertility coach 6 years ago, I may not have had to work nearly as hard, if that makes sense.